Yellow, and Red Mix by Digis27, Chapter 11. Naruto spun at the oddly familiar voice coming across a group of four-leaf shinobi, all now looking at him expectantly. There was the obvious sensei of the group, a tall, raven-haired woman with piercing red eyes wrapped up in the strangest dress Naruto had ever seen. It looked like it was made from rolls of paper with strange patterns down the center of each strip. It was sleeveless on one side, and on the other three there was a bright red sleeve, almost the same color as her eyes. From the from the impractical from the impracticality of her clothing, Naruto would have guessed she was mainly a genjutsu type. To her right were two boys. The first was her familiar. Was to her the first was also familiar. A tall boy with unruly brown hair and slitted eyes, like Naruto, except his lacked irises. The most discerning feature were his triangular clan markings that adorned each cheek, as well as the small white puppy that rested on top of his head. He wore a fairly plain gray jacket with dark gray fur lining that was almost as shaggy as his hair. The only thing that Naruto could glean from his appearance was that he was naturally impatient due to the way he irritably stood looking around. The other boy was what Naruto would describe as the epitome of average. His straight but wavy brown hair hung limply around his head, just held back by his headband. He wore a dull gray shirt with a navy jacket slung over the top and black shinobi pants. His hands were bound with tape, which at least told Naruto he liked to get in close with his fights, or at least he trained a lot, most likely both. There was nothing else noteworthy about him, so Naruto moved on to the last of the group. No amount of time could have made her any less recognizable to Naruto. After all, she was the last face he had seen before leaving behind his life in the Leaf Village. She wore dark blue pants cut off at the mid-calf, much like the Yuyos were. She wore a cream-colored jacket with a white fur trim opened down the middle to reveal a navy shirt. Her hair was shiny and straight in a short hime cut with two chin-length bangs framing her face. It was her pale, pupilless eyes that stood out the most, giving her features an almost angelic look. Hinata? Naruto wasn't sure whether to be shocked or happy at seeing her. They hadn't exactly parted well, although he didn't think it was on bad terms. He noticed the leaf headband around her neck and smiled as she quickly walked over. Naruto, it is you! She rushed over and hugged him tightly, much to everyone in the vicinity's surprise. Toyuya especially was eyeing the newcomer with barely concealing suspicion and just the slightest hints of anger. Finally, Hinata parted from the hug, slightly red about the nose, but so was Naruto. He wasn't used to such open displays of affection, never mind with him and a girl he barely knew. Naruto, I can't believe you're back! The wild-looking boy from her team over to walked over to walked over at this point, eyeing Naruto curiously as well as his teammates. He especially seemed transfixed with Naruto's headband, which proudly displayed the kanji for 9 on his forehead. Taiyo was left blank as she never felt any affiliation with the Sand Village, or at least that was what she felt towards what she was, but that was, or at least that was what she told Naruto. Gaara, on the other hand, was the symbol of Forsunagakure, as it was on the team of three, as is, as it was on the team of three older ninja behind them. Hey Hinata, how do you know a ninja from the village hidden in the sand? Hinata didn't take her eye off of Naruto as she replied, he isn't. He used to live here in Konoha, but he left when we were 7. Naruto frowned brightly when the girl said we, but brushed it off as Kiba once again took to examining him. He looked a bit more defensive now, and Naruto could tell from the way his muscles tensed he was ready to react to a fight. So he's a missing nin? He said it almost with a growl, and Naruto took over the conversation from this point, not exactly comfortable with Hinata telling everyone his information. No, I left while we were in the academy, so I wasn't a ninja yet. I was just a civilian moving on. Kiba seemed to relax a little bit, but still had that annoying curiosity in his eyes. Why would you leave though? Now that he really thought hard about it, he vaguely remembered a kid with similar blonde spiky hair from his early academy days. Then one day he just stopped turning up. Hardly anyone even noticed. The kid didn't have any real friends, and the only time people would even acknowledged his existence was when he performed some outlandish prank. Nato's eyes turned dark as he stared back at the fair looking boy. I had my reasons. Tayuya finally decided to inject herself into the conversation and run it on the two leaf shinobi in her own unique way. And it's none of your fucking concern, mutt. Kiba looked a little irritated but shrugged, his curiosity somewhat placated. This time Tayuya turned to the violet haired girl who had initiated this whole conversation. And what about you, princess? Where do you get off announcing Naruto's fucking presence to the whole goddamn village? For his part, Naruto just sighed loudly, just like he feared that taking Taiya out of the comfort of the Sand Village had immediately raised all the defenses he had worked for so many years to bring down. It's all right, Taiya. She didn't know. She looked at him questioningly. Naruto also almost took her side in a conversation, yet this time he had taken a more neutral position. It annoyed her greatly. They were supposed to be best friends, yet he was defending this girl that might as well have told that might have told the Hokage himself that Naruto was here. Hi, Hinata. Long time no see, huh? The previously timid girl nodded, now a little wary at the fiery red head to Naruto's left. So you're here for the tuning exams then? Naruto nodded and she smiled hesitantly. Us too. We were just going out to train actually when I saw you. He nodded again. Listen, Hinata, as much as I enjoy catching up, we do have to go on and register. The girl nodded hurriedly. Oh, I know. Sorry, I just saw you and didn't want to miss the opportunity to thank you. He just looked at her questioningly, unsure of what to make of that. Huh? That was the extent of the cultured vocabulary he could muster. Before you left, I was shy and timid, and I never really put much effort into my training. After the conversation I had, I blamed myself for you leaving. I started to work harder, but put more into everything, and I even stopped stuttering. Naruto grinned broadly at that. He had always thought Hinata a little weird for the way she acted. To hear that he had helped her get over that, even unwittingly, was warming. Hinata, it wasn't your fault I left. She just smiled, some red entering her cheeks. I know that, but I was just young and I guess I had a small crush on you back then. Now that was a revelation for Naruto. Back then he wouldn't have believed that anybody could like him, especially not in that way. Before he could mutter something that he was sure would have been just as cultured as his last response to something unexpected, the team leader of Hinata's group ushered them on, now intent to get to training. Well, I'll see you at the Chunin exams, Naruto. She smiled happily she smiled happily as she left while Takuya at to his side just scowled and Gara remained emotionless. What the fuck was that about? Naruto shrugged helplessly, just as stumped by that strange occurrence as she was. Like you said, Naruto, we do need to go to the tuning registry. Gara, always the voice of reason in the group, finally waded into the conversation, having been highly amused by the proceedings so far. Naruto nodded, still a little absent-minded after the odd encounter, but his wits were slowly returning. The six Sand Shinobi wandered through the village, taking in the sights, although Naruto quickly found that barely anything had changed in his time away. The village was as familiar to him as it had been on the day he left. Every time Naruto passed through somewhere familiar, his discomfort increased as he received flashbacks of villagers beating him. They passed an alley and he saw his 6-year-old self being pinned down by large men while their friend cut horrible words into his skin. They passed the school and he saw himself sitting on a swing, watching the other children run around and have fun. They passed the park and he only saw the parents look at him coldly, warning the precious children away from the monster. Hey, are you going to be okay? Taiya had noticed his barely concealing pain as they meandered through the village. He offered a weak smile for her concern and nodded. Yeah, just some bad memories. She nodded solemnly, sure that if they ever had to go to Earth Country, she would be feeling the same way. She was a little surprised at herself when she subconsciously took Naruto's hand in her own and gently squeezed it. Some of his old self flooded back into him, and his smile grew as he looked at her. Thanks to Chan. She narrowed her eyes for a moment but decided to let the suffix slide this once. He was having a hard time and she didn't need to add to that. Other than noticing Naruto's obvious pain at coming home to his birth village, Tagiya's focus was fixated on one other thing. She couldn't help but stare at the enormous mountain that held the Hokage monument. The four faces of the Hokage stared back at her, unmoving in their rocky visages. It was an impressive sight to behold, going beyond Suna's imposing entrance in its sheer in awe factor. Suddenly, Tagiya and Naruto felt a wave of deja vu wash over them as three Anbu dropped down around the group of six, and one immediately walked over to Naruto. We have been ordered to bring you to the Hokage immediately. Naruto just gulped at their arrival. He had the smell shinobi nearby, of course, but being in a ninja village that was hardly worth mentioning. Tagiya just glared at him in a look that said, "How does this keep happening to us?" Naruto just nodded and made a move to go with them. However, when Gara and Tagiya did the same, they were stopped by the other two Anbu. "Our orders are for Naruto Uzumaki only." He just stared at the man defiantly. "Where I go, my friends go too." The Anbu looked at each other and the one with spiky brown hair just shrugged. "Fine, but they must remain outside the Hokage's office." Gara nodded while Tagiya still looked unhappy. Naruto just smiled. "It's okay, Tagiya. I'll be fine. Believe it." Tagiya didn't know whether to smile at his infectious enthusiasm or smack him upside the head for using that annoying phrase again. She did both. Naruto rubbed his head painfully as he exited the Shunshin with the Anbu escort, once again finding himself overcome with deja vu as he looked around the office. It was familiar and unfamiliar at the time. It hadn't changed much from the few times he had been in here as a child, still cluttered with countless oddities and books that littered the room. What especially hadn't changed was the old man sitting behind the sturdy oak desk that looked back at him. Naruto wasn't sure what to do or say as he looked across at the one man who had cared about him in his youth. He wasn't sure whether or not to be happy or frightened. He may have been the old man back then, but he was still the Hokage of the hidden leaf village. Sarutobi seemed to answer this for him as the old man got up from his comfortable chair and walked over to the smaller boy. There was a moment of hesitancy before, with a motion of a hand, he dismissed all the Anbu in the room. "Naruto." The tone was warm, but he was still so uncertain of everything. He just remained stock still, staring at the very first caring person he had ever known. He flinched back when the old man dropped to one knee and looked Naruto directly in the face before smiling warmly and pulling Naruto into a tight embrace that left the young boy speechless. Suddenly, he couldn't help it, and tears broke through his defenses, spilling through his cheeks as he returned the hug and wrapped his hands around the Hokage's shoulders. Sarutobi finally disengaged from the embrace and looked at Naruto, his own eyes slightly watery. "You've grown so much." Naruto sniffled a little as he pulled back the last of his tears, not wanting to look so emotional in front of the Hokage. "I missed you, old man." Hiruzen smiled across at the boy. No matter how much the affectionate name may have annoyed him back then, he missed it nonetheless. "I missed you too." Naruto had to visibly fight more tears from escaping as he heard that. He didn't think anybody would have cared at his departure. Finding out that even one had, he was overcome with emotion. "I'm sorry for leaving." Sarutobi looked at the boy before him with a bemused expression. "Don't come back after so long, Naruto, and let one of the first things you say to me be a lie." Naruto nodded tiredly. He should have known the perceptive old man would have seen right through him. "Don't worry about it, Naruto." He looked pensively away from the blond boy for a moment. "I understand why you left. It should be me apologizing to you for how you got treated." "You're right. I wasn't sorry." Naruto's smile brightened a bit as he thought of his life after leaving the village. "I made friends, and I wouldn't trade it for the world." The Hokage smiled knowingly at him. "Yes, the Kazekage's son, if I'm not mistaken. Although I only know the name of the girl and not much else." Naruto smiled broadly, but also had a questioning look in his eye at how Sarutobi knew this. He laughed merrily, catching onto the confused look. "Really, Naruto? Did you expect me to just let you run away without finding out what happened to you?" Naruto just smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. "I've kept close tabs on you since then, watching your progress and development." He smiled warmly at the worried look on Naruto's face. "I'm very proud of you, Naruto, as your parents would be." He finished in his head. Naruto beamed happily at this, and the two began to recollect themselves. Naruto told him of many of the adventures he had shared with Gaara and Taiya, while Hiruzen happily listened to how his life had been. He was more than happy to hear that his life had been happy since leaving the village, and reaffirming his belief that taking him back would have been a mistake. I'm happy to hear all of this, Naruto, and I expect you to do well at the Chunin exam. Now, I think we've been talking for a bit too long. Your friends might be getting worried. Naruto nodded, looking at the clock on the wall for the first time since entering the office. Do you want to meet them? Naruto looked acceptant, happily so to Sarutobi's keen eyes, and he laughed expectantly. Yes, I think that would be nice. I would like to meet anybody that would make your life enjoyable. Naruto grinned broadly, reminding Hiruzen of how the boy used to be, even if it was all an act back then. Great. Gar's a bit shy, but he's really great when you get to know him, and Ayuya is, well, she's. Naruto furrowed his brow, trying to find the appropriate word to sum up his very first and best friend. She's amazing. He nodded cheerfully. The word felt about right, even if it couldn't adequately do Tayuya justice. Hiruzen just looked amused at the word choice, wondering about the red-haired girl a bit more. The Hokage motioned with his hand again, and the personal Anbu that never left his side dropped down to admit the two Sangenin into the room. Tayuya entered nervously while Gaara remained his usual impassive self and walked in as calmly as one would a shop to browse their goods. It hoped that his own father was/had been a Kage and was used to dealing with the powerful auras they gave off. Immediately, Hiruzen nodded solemnly at the young Sanyusen. Garano Subaku, I was sorry to hear of your father's murder. My condolences to you and your siblings. Garo gave a curt nod, thankfully for the sentiment as he stood over to one side, unsure of why he was even in here. Naruto here, Naruto here has told me a bit about both of you, and firstly, I would like to give you my deepest thanks. He chuckled upon seeing their confused expressions. Even Gaara had raised his brow at the admission. Naruto had a hard life in my village. He strained the word hard, but it moved on. It brings me great happiness to see that all changed when he left, and from what he has told me, it is mainly thanks to you too. He extended his arms to Tahiya, who nervously took it before he moved on to Gaara. However, when he extended the hand this time, he was shocked but not surprised when sand shot out of the gourd on his back to intercept the contact. Oh, so it's true? Gaara nodded, knowing that the Hokage would know of his status as Jinchuriki. I look forward to seeing our participation in the Chunin exams. Until then, Sarutobi was interrupted as the door to his office burst open and a very irate woman rushed in, anger and irritation in her eyes. Hokage-sama, what is this I hear about Naruto? She stopped mid-sentence as she looked around and saw Naruto giving him time to study her. She was of an average height for a woman of her age, somewhere in her late 30s if he had to guess. She had very wild, untamable brunette hair that flamed out around her like a lion's mane. She shared the same red triangular markings on her cheek as the boy he had met earlier in Hinata's squad. Like him, she shared the same iris lacking slitted eyes and feral appearances, but with her purple lipstick, she was decidedly more feminine. She wore a standard jonin outfit that was a common sight in Konoha, with the usual flak jacket on earth underneath. She had pants and a shirt that were brown and green respectively, giving her the look of somebody who enjoyed outdoors, or at least camouflage themselves in it. She was looking at Naruto with shock evident on her face, something that he could clearly see wasn't a common occurrence just from the way she acted. My god, he looks just like. She was quickly cut off from voicing any more of that sentence as the Hokage shot her a particularly dangerous look. Well, it was very good seeing you, Naruto, and meeting you both, Tayuya, Gaara. He nodded in each of their directions as he said their name. Perhaps now you should go and sign in for the exams. Wait, it was the newcomer who spoke, and it was directed straight at Naruto, despite another look from the Hokage, which didn't look all that friendly. Naruto, do you have anywhere to stay during the proceedings of the Chunin exam? He just eyed her curiously but nodded slowly. Well, 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 they provide accommodations here, don't they? The woman smiled in a feral manner that to anybody else would have seemed frightening, but to Naruto, who had seen the most feral look one can see behind the gates of his internal prison, it didn't have much effect. Nonsense. I would be more than happy if you spent the duration of your stay for the junior exam in the Inuzaka clan compound. It's much more comfortable than those huts they provide for the participation anyway. Naruto just gazed at her, still trying to figure out the underlying motivation for such a seemingly generous offer. Uh, Thanks, I guess. The older woman nodded cheerfully, still maintaining that grin she wore. You can call me Tsunami. She looked around, seemingly noticing his two teammates for the very first time. Oh, and your friends are welcome to stay as well. She seemed to fixate on Tahiya almost as much as she had when she first spotted Naruto, and it sort of freaked the younger girl out. Naruto and his team were finally ushered out by the Anbu in the room, while Tizumi looked at the Hokage victoriously, who, for his part, sighed wearily into his palm. Was that really necessary, Tizumi? The woman turned to glare daggers at the older man. Damn right it was. I was stopped from adopting him, so you aren't taking this away from me. Hiruzen just sighed. I couldn't if I wanted to. He's a genin now, one not even of this village. I don't have control of him in that way. Anyway, you knew the reason why you couldn't adopt him? Tizumi snarled. Oh yes, because you couldn't give possession of the Nine-Tails jerky to any one clan. She sneered as she said it, her disdain obvious. He was a baby lord. She was a baby Lord Hokage, and you let him grow up hated and feared, unloved by anyone. I couldn't even get Kiba to befriend him because of the way the others acted around him. Saratobi didn't deny her accusations. He actually hung his head a little. Don't you think I regret that, Tizumi? Yeah, I was so worried when he ran away. Who knew what could have happened to him? He looked up, passion in his eyes now. I was just as I was just lucky that it was the best thing that could have happened to him. He smiled warmly. You should have heard him, Tizumi. He spoke with such happiness when he talked about his friends. Kushina would have been so proud. A small tear came to Tizumi's eyes at the mention of her friend before she cleared it with the back of her hand. Speaking of the red hot habanero, she smiled fondly of the nickname she had given one of her closest friends. Did that girl he was with? Hiruzen held up a hand to cut her off. Yes, it would seem Minato's blood does run deep. They both shared a chuckle at the thought, both reminiscing fondly about their friends. Once they were all signed up for the exams, the three took some time to wander around the village. They approached the Inuzaka compound, but opted against going in just yet, instead deciding that they would explore the village that Naruto had once called home. The two non-fire country natives were just curious about how the other village was different to the stand, while Naruto wanted to see what had changed. They enjoyed walking around the village, comparing everything to the sand. Tayuya idly remembered the description Naruto had given her all those years ago whilst hiding from a sandstorm, and she had to agree with his assessment. Walking down a new street really was like walking into a new country. Everywhere was just so individual, so unique. It really wasn't. It really was different from her home for the last 7 years. Yet they shared the same life and vibrancy that made the hidden village so special. Suddenly, Naruto looked around as if just noticing that the sun was setting, and his face broke into a wide grin. I have to show you guys something. Without any more warning than that, the excitable blonde took off down the street and left without any other options. His teammates sprinted after him. They wound through the unfamiliar streets, trying to keep up with the tenacious Jinchuriki. He still remembered this route after so long. Finally, they caught up to him just as his foot was beginning up a flight of stairs, literally carving into the great mountain behind the village. Naruto, where the fuck are you going? It's getting late. Naruto turned even as he was running up the stairs and started climbing them backwards, still with the same pace. You'll see, he said it with a devilish grin that both annoyed and intrigued Tayuya at the same time. She cursed her heart for fluttering the way it did when he looked at her like that. She despised the strange and alien feeling she was getting recently, ever since her body had begun changing. Finally, exhausted and panting from the long climb up and winding stairs, they caught up to the spiky haired boy. She was sitting on what looked like some kind of stone platform that jutted over the mountain, giving them all a breathtaking view of Konohagakure. With the start, she realized that he was sitting on the carved head of the fourth Hokage, a thought that both made her nervous and feel slightly devious at the same thought. She walked over and joined him, noticing his pensive look as he stared out over his former home. She remembered him while also mentioning that he used to do this in that same conversation in the cave. Is it like you remember? He smiled up at her, a deep, genuine smile that made him look like a young child again, not the battle hardened shinobi he had become. Better. She joined him on one side, sitting down and leaning her head against his shoulder in the way she always did when it was just the two or three of them. Gara also came and joined them, sitting down on Naruto's other side. I'm not resting my head on your shoulder, just so you know. The three of them shared a laugh as they just sat there, looking out over the village as the sun set. It set the sky ablaze with the bright hues of red and orange, and for the first time, Togiya saw how the color could be so appealing to her friend. The three of them sat up there in silence for a good amount of time, none of them noticing when minutes turned into hours, as they just enjoyed the company of their two best friends, respectively. Eventually, Gara stood up, knocking the two other out of their reverie as they noticed just how late it had gotten. I'm getting tired, and you two know how much I enjoy my sleep. He smirked as he said it. When Naruto and Kyuubi had finally knocked Shukaku around enough to allow Gara to sleep, he couldn't thank his friend enough. Now he took so many opportunities to do so, even after all this time. As if to second his opinion, Taiya let out a long yawn and stood up as well. You two go on ahead. I'll meet up with you in a bit. They nodded, knowing that the blonde just wanted some time alone to reminisce about his old life before coming back. They nodded, and Taiya smirked. Don't take too long. I need my bed warmer. He smiled and nodded back and watched as Gara carried them down the mountain on a cloud of his sand, or as he liked to call it, the quick way. Naruto had smirked when he first heard him call it that. He had his own views on what the quick way was, but kept it to himself. He only stayed up there a bit longer, soaking in the sight of the village at night with all the lights from the various houses and shops. He gazed up at the sky, smiling fondly at the familiar orange hue that just licked at the edge of the sky from all the natural light Konoha produced. He snorted loudly. Hidden village his ass. He stood up and stretched, taking one last look at the village sprawled out beneath him before smiling and jumping straight off of the enormous stone head. He sailed down, enjoying the pureness of the feeling of wind rushing past his skin. Before he hit the ground, he stuck out one hand, plowing it into a building and leaving four long and deep gashes into the stone. He came to rest on the ground with a small hop before walking back up the wall he used to break his fall. He smiled, knowing that anyone who saw him would have surely called him insane, while he just found the experience fun. The Inzak compound was all the way across the village, so he had a lot of free time as he jumped from rooftop to rooftop. He pulled out the same orange book he always had on hand and began to read it as he made his way across the village. He was completely unaware that there was another shinobi doing the exact same thing. Occam's razor hated being wrong, and sure enough, the two distracted ninja met with a resounding smack. They landed in an alley underneath where they had been jumping, and Naruto just sat there, rubbing the soot on his head where the jonin had had hit him. He stared at the man in the dim alley, his heightened eyes easily picking out the man's unique features. His hair was a gravity-defying spiky mass of silver that jutted out to one side over his headband. He wore the standard jonin attire of the leaf with dark blue underclothing. His face was a mystery due to the equally blue face mask that seemed to always be present on the man's face. However, his truly noticeable feature was the slanted headband that covered the man's an eye that Naruto just so happened to know was a Sharingan. He knew this because this wasn't the first time he had seen this particular ninja. End of chapter 11.